So in Nuke you've got two main warp tools. You have the spline warp and you've got the grid warp that I've just mentioned. Now first of all I'm roughly going to explain the grid warp, but for this project we're probably going to use the spline warp. The spline warp has two inputs. You've got your destination here and your source. Now we'll connect the source input to our mask right here, and we'll connect the destination to our normal face without anything right here. I usually don't connect the viewer to the grid warp right away, because as soon as you set up your grid warp, it's going to start to disform the image. So I prefer rather not to have a look till everything's set up. I just click on this so that I've got my menu open, and then you can see if you zoom out, you've got these little grids down below right here. The pink one is your source and the blue one is your destination. Now I'm going to hide the destination grid right here because I'm first going to set up the source. So let's mark all the points and then move them to somewhere where it makes a little bit more sense. Sorry, I think I did a mistake here. I want to have the cross in the middle as well. There. You can also punch image size, then this grid will actually match the entire image size, but I think in this case it's better to adjust this manually. So we'll just scale this up. I'm going to make myself a little more space here. And then we're going to take the top points and move them up here, and the bottom ones to down here. Maybe these a little bit more to the side. I'm now also going to connect the viewer to the merge so that I can see where my mask is, and I'm going to connect the grid warp again. Now I can take single points and adjust that to the form I need. There we go. And maybe around the eyes we want to follow a more natural contour. There we go. Now we've got nice points around the eye which we could adjust, but we're really missing some lines up here. So what we can do is we can hit add and then click where you want to add your line. Again at the bottom, and that will add a line for you. You could also do that vertically if you just hit add again and then hit one of the top lines. Now if I uncheck this little box hide, you can see that our destination grid is still in the position before. Now we would never be able to match these up, so there's a handy function. You can just hit copy on your source grid and paste that into the destination. And now you can see our blue grid is right on top of our pink one. Now I'm going to hide our source grid and lock that. Now down below we've got the output blend, but we need to connect our viewer to the grid warp first. And there you can see that we now see our source input, and if we blend, we will be able to see our destination. And as soon as I take some of these points and move them around, I'm actually distorting the image, and then I can see if I'm satisfied by just, moving the blend around. I want to have this eye down here, and that way you can make your adjustments. If you move down the line, then move that somewhere around, then it'll animate if you have actually set the keys. So Let me go back to, what was it? I think 44. Place this here. Hit set. And then go, and you can see it's made a keyframe now. Go to frame 50. Drag this over here. And it is now automatically made another keyframe for me. And if I kind of scroll in between, it's animated my transform. Animating our images that way would be pretty tedious. We could connect a tracker to these points here, but we would need a tracker for every single point. And that would involve quite a bit of tracking. There's no overall tracker input for this, and that's where the spline warp comes in pretty handy. So let's have a look at the spline warp. I'm just going to delete my grid warp because we're not going to use it. Let's connect our spline warp like we did before with a grid warp, our source, and our destination. And I'm going to connect our view to our merge right here. Now, compared to the grid warp, we don't have a grid with a spline warp. We can draw our own lines like we like them. And if we take the first Bezier, as you can see on this little note, the first Bezier curve will be used as an outline for masking the spline warp's deformation. If we tick that, and now with Control and Alt, we can draw our little spline right in here. Oops. There we go, right around our shape. And left mouse button to close. Just move that around a little bit as well. And this just means all our deformation is just going to happen in this area. So it's kind of masking off the outsides. Now, any other curve that we draw is actually going to be used for the deformation. So let's draw a second curve, and I'm just going to draw that quickly around the eye right here, just like we did the first one. And if we now go to show, we can see our destination and our source. I go back to destination, and let me also connect our viewer to the spline warp. We can now see what we're actually doing. So this way, we're again deforming our image. If you go to source, this is where we're actually coming from. But if we were to connect a tracker, again, we can't connect that to the center. We can only connect that, we can only connect that to a single point again. So, you know, that's why sometimes fine drawing an entire curve is really not as practical, and that's why I'm going to delete this curve as just animating a single point. I can hook that up to the tracker, and I think that sometimes, I mean, it depends on what you do, but sometimes it just makes a lot more sense. So let's get rid of this point. And then before we track, we'll also increase the size of our mask here. We don't want anything to be cut off when we add the movement. There, I think that should do the job. And then let's also go back to frame 1, and we'll add a tracker. And we'll connect that to a point right here. Connect the viewer to the tracker, because we don't want to track the mask, we want to track his face. Okay, there we are. Now we should have a tracker point somewhere. Let's see where it is. It's right down here. Let's activate all of them, and then let's just move them up here so they're close to where we actually need them. and we can zoom back in again. And now I'm going to deactivate all of them except tracker 4. I'm going to start with tracker 4 up here, and we'll place it right on his feature here on the forehead. That should be a good point to sample. And then I'll just click on our start button here, render from 1 to 90. And it could very well be that our tracker is not going to track entirely through the whole scene. But let's see how it does. It's probably already did a mistake here, so I'm going to hit cancel. It's not on our little bump here. So let's move to the point where the tracker is still on this position, on the correct position. Frame 29 seems to be where the tracker leaves. So let's clear everything that's been tracked further than that point. And let's hit grab and just try to manually go frame by frame. Okay, move the tracker back to its position again. Hit grab. Go from here. Okay, now I'm just going to start to track till the end again, see if that works. Okay, so that was the first point we tracked here, and I'm probably going to track some other points as well. That's why I've got all my 4 tracks here set up. I'd say I guess I'd track, let's go back to frame 1. The end of the eyebrow maybe could be a good position. What else do we have? Maybe this dark spot right here. And something around this area. Now, since I don't want to bore you with tracking, I'm going to delete this node, and I'm going to copy in a tracker that I've already done. So here you can see I've already got all my tracks. This one down here was mostly manual labor, so moving it along there wasn't a great feature. Now let me show you what we can do with these tracking points now that we have them. We'll make sure that we're on our spline warp, and then we'll Control-Alt-Click onto our features here that we've just tracked. Now this adds this little point as we already discussed earlier, and I'm going to add another point. Just click anywhere and then Control-Alt again onto the next place that we tracked. That was the end of the eyebrow. Then going down, we also tracked this little spot and something in this region right here. Oops, didn't click somewhere. There we go. Now, if I open my tracker 1 and zoom in a little bit, you can see I've got my tracker 4 position right here and my little dot for my spline warp right here. So now I'm going to go to tracker 4 right here, and with my computer, it's Alt, I'm on a Windows system. I don't know if it's some command or I don't know. On yours you just have to try. I think usually it should be Control, but yeah, I don't know. So with me it's Alt, and I click Alt, and I just drag this onto my little spline warp point right here and let go. And you can see that move to the position of tracker 4, and if I scrub along, you can see that that point actually now follows our tracker. Go back to frame 1, and we'll do exactly that for the next point. That's tracker 3. We'll go to tracker 3, and with Alt, drag onto that little dot. And again, it hops to the tracking point. Same for tracker 2. Alt, and onto our little purple dot. and also for tracker 1. There we go. Now if we connect our view to the spline warp, and we'll just scrub through it, we can see we have a little bit of animation here. Oops, the distortion, that's a bit heavy. And I assume that's being caused by our points reaching the edge of our mask. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to discheck first Bezier as our mask, and I'm in fact going to delete the curve. We don't really need a mask because we don't really have anything surrounding that's going to be affected by our distortion. Now that seems to have reduced our problem, and you can see we've got some movement in our mask now besides the movement of our head. Let's have a little look to see what our outcome is here. Just going to close my tab. So yeah, it's moving, but maybe we could also need, maybe we do need some additional points. Maybe we haven't just reached that level yet. So I'm going to add some more tracking points. And I'm just going to copy in another tracker that I did. I just tracked 2 more points, one right here on his nose and the other further up on the cheek. So I'm going to go back to frame 1, go to my spline warp, and we'll add another point right here, the side of his nose, and one right in, let me see, yeah, right in here. Oops. There we go. I undid that one beforehand. So, okay. Connect that. So we got tracker 1 right here. Sorry. Tracker 2, I mean. And connect that to our little point. To our other track 2. There. Okay, so let's go and see how we're doing. Go to our scanline render way at the bottom here. Move our head into position. And I'm just going to switch on proxy. And it might as well be a good idea to actually connect our little spline warp, which I haven't done yet, I've just forgotten. So let's take the image, add that in. Or, oh yeah, then we just get the mask, sorry. We'll do it like this, move this below here, and connect our A input to our merge. So that way we'll now have our animated spline warp mask on top of our footage here, and we'll connect that back to our geo. Now if we move back to the scanline render, connect the viewer, move this into position, hit play, and we've now kind of got something like twitching, a little bit of movement in the area where we just had a really static effect. If we still need more movement, we could always, do our own animation or add some more tracking points. That's easily done. One thing that you do have to be aware of is when you transfer your tracking markers to your spline points, that animation is baked, so it's not connected to the tracker anymore. So if you do need to correct your tracking markers again, then it's probably better to delete your spline point and just add a new one and connect that to the tracker again. Now I think we brought this to life nicely, but I think there's some more stuff we can do. So let's go down here to our composite, where we actually merge our face on top of the body. I'm going to also close all my tabs here so I don't have these tracking markers anymore. So one thing we could add right here would be a muzzle flash. So I've already did one, and let's read that in. It's under images, and then, no, of course it's under flash. There, if we skip through, we've got our little muzzle flash here. Open that. And let's merge that. Now it's sitting right here in the corner. It's not a realistic one, but I thought maybe a bit of sci-fi could be fun. It's too big, and it's in the wrong position, and we want it to move with the gun. So let us first add a tracker and attach that to the gun. I mean, the muzzle flashes coming out of the barrel, but I think this might be a better position to actually connect our tracker. Okay, so let's just add a tracker here. There we go. We'll connect that. Find our tracker, our locator here. Move that into position. And then this is a pretty fast movement, so we also want to make sure that we have enough room as sample area so the tracker can actually, you know, find this little spot again. Okay, and I'm just going to track. And I think that's gone rather well. Let me have a look here. In general, it seems to stick. Now, we didn't track the first part, so let's do that now. There it goes again. Let me just one more time check. There's this part where right here, where he moves up the gun. But it seemed to be alright. I mean, the tracker seems to be stuck to where it's supposed to be. That's brilliant. Okay, we'll just cut out, disconnect the tracker, and we're just going to add that right in here to our muzzle flash. And in the transform tab of the tracker, we're going to set the transformation to match move. And now, if I scrub through the footage, you can see that, well, it's really hard to see, but actually now our muzzle flash is moving up and down with the movement of the gun. And what we should do is we should add a transform just to move this into the correct position here. Oh yeah, what I also forgot to mention is that we've got our muzzle flash on black. So what we do here is we have to set our merge to plus. That takes care of that. And then let me move this into the view again. Yeah, so where was I? Move this into the right position, and we also want to scale it down. There. Maybe like this. It depends on how you like it, really. I mean, it's not a realistic muzzle flash, as I mentioned before. So if we move through, we can see it's more or less in the correct position. Now, looking at this, I think, wow, great, cool, we've got the muzzle flash, we've got a little face, but wouldn't it be nice if our muzzle flash would actually kind of cast some light on our scar here? You know, make the scar light up as the gun fires. Now, one way we could do that is by adding some lights into our 3D scene. So let's do that. let's add a light. And we'll connect that to our scene. And we'll connect our viewer to our 3D scene right here to see where our lights actually, and our lights actually right here. You can actually see a little bit of shine on our mesh back here. So I want to have one light that comes a little bit in from the side here, there, maybe a bit higher up. Is that in the correct position? I did move that back too far. And let us also create the second light and also connect that to the scene. And let's assume that this light is kind of in the position of the gun, something like this maybe, or maybe a little bit further over here. Yeah, that could be it. I mean, could be a little bit closer probably. Maybe like this. So if we go back to our scanline render, go back to 2D land, we can see that the lights, if we switch them off, hitting D, just toggle between them, we can see that our lights are already affecting our 3D shape here. Well, at the moment, I'm really not too impressed with our result right here. The good thing is, we can also change how our mesh or our surface reacts to the lights. So let me create a little bit more space, just grab all this stuff, move it a little bit further down, and then right in front of our read geo here, we'll add a Phong. Our material is coming right down here and into our mesh, or onto our mesh. And right in between there, we're going to affect that material with our Phong shader right here. And you can see immediately we've got some highlights and so on. Of course, this doesn't, really look like we want it to look, but we're just starting with the shader. And you can see our Phong has multiple inputs. We've got map shiny, map specular, emissions, and diffuse. So let's add a little helper here, and we'll connect the diffuse to our incoming material. We'll also drag that to the side just to have a little bit of space, and we'll take the map S, the specular, and connect that. Let me move that out here. And since we're really doing a simple setup, I'm just going to leave the other inputs for the Phong shader unconnected. And right here, where my specular is coming in, I'm going to add a color lookup, or no, a color correct node maybe. And I'm going to boost the contrast, and I'm going to boost the gain, but I'm going to reduce my saturation. Now in my Phong shader, I can also adjust a couple of settings, and you can just, move the sliders around to see what you get. I'm just going to lower the color value right here, and I didn't connect the emissions, so definitely going to increase the specular intensity. So now we're getting some brights here. And the shininess, minimum shininess, going to move that down. And the maximum shininess I'm going to move up. Now this still doesn't look very dramatic, but the good thing about the Phong shader is now that it's in place in the correct position, we can, do whatever with our lights and see what we get. If I just go to the translation of one of my lights and just move it around, we can see that we're actually getting interesting effects kind of shininess or whatever on his forehead. That's interactive, you know, we could change the intensity of the light or angle, I don't know, whatever we want to do, animate it. I think we could really create some amazing effects this way. Now I'm going to tone this down just a little bit. And the second light, we said we might wanted to use that and pretend that this was the light coming from our muzzle flashes. The only problem is, do we now have to go through and watch our muzzle flashes and animate the intensity when the gun actually fires, and then set a keyframe when it stops firing, set a keyframe, tone down the intensity, and so on and so forth? That's going to be a lot of work. So is there another way we can achieve this? Let's move down to our muzzle flash. And yes, there's something we can do. In Nuke, it's called the curve tool. And we'll just add that to the flow. Connect that to our muzzle flash. Connect our viewer. Now, you can see it kind of looks like a tracker. This is again our sample area. Let's decrease that area, make it smaller, and I'll just place it right here in the middle of our muzzle flash because I want to really get these brightness values. Now all we have to do is go to the curve type, average intensities, and hit the go button. And then choose our range. Yes, we want to check the muzzle flash brightness on all the frames, and hit OK. Now the curve tool is analyzing the flash, and if we go into the intensity data, we can see we've got some RGB values here, and you can see they output 0 when we don't have a muzzle flash, and we get some color values when we do have a flash. So just to illustrate what the curve tool does, let's add a roto paint tool in here, connect that to our muzzle flash, connect our viewer to our roto paint, and let's somewhere in a corner here paint a little roto shape. Now in the colors tab right here, colors, we want to have our single values, and we'll open our curve tool. I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit, and if we now with Control Shift, I think it is, just mark this up, drag this up here, our green to the green and our blue to the blue, then we've copied our animation from the curve tool, and what happens now is that we now actually get our roto color reacting to the average color of the sample area of our curve tool. Now that's pretty neat, and I think we can use that on our light as well. Let's get rid of the roto paint, and I'm just going to deconnect our curve tool. The animation is now already baked in, so you can move that into the flow wherever you want to. I'm just going to cut that out and move that close to where my light is, so that I just know what this is about and where I'm getting the values from. Then in the light itself, again, I've got the color right here. I want it to show my RGB inputs. Again, I'm going to click on my curve tool so that I have that open, and then I'm going to Shift Control drag these values right down in here. So let's move through the if we move through the timeline, we can see that these values are actually updating corresponding to our curve tool input. Now, if we switch into our 3D environment and connect our viewer to the scene, and just scrub through the timeline, we can see that we actually get some changes in the lighting according to our color values here. And let's have a look what that looks like just coming out through the scanline renderer. If we scrub through here, we can see that it's kind of flickering. It's really quite subtle, but of course we could still boost our intensity, and then we would have some major changes. Maybe we could also find a better position for the light and so on and so forth. I'm just going to leave it the way it is for the time being. But I think this is really one way where the 3D environment and you can really help to, you know, move something along, really help to progress it. Another way to do that, or, you know, at least to make some changes right here, would be to add a displace geonode right after our transform right here. And in the images, you choose the head displace. So I've already drawn a black and white image of the displacement that I want to add right here. Now if you toggle the displace geonode, you can see there's kind of like a horn coming out. So let's go into our scene, and I'm going to switch off the lights for the time being, just so we can see our head a little bit clearer. And if we zoom in on the head, we can see that when we move the scale of the displacement, there's actually some sort of horn coming out. Now, since this is a low poly mesh, this doesn't really look good. So if we had a higher version, and I'm just going to go back into my head mesh, and instead of the head mesh low, I'm going to select the head mesh high and add that in. You can see we've actually really got some kind of horn coming in and out when we move the scale slider of the displacement. I think this is a great way to also achieve additional transformations on your character that you want to modify. And I mean, this is a really simple thing. You could just take a RotoPaint node and just draw in with a gray or with a white and add other bumps sticking out and so on and so forth, and you would actually displace your mesh, and you can achieve some great effects that way as well. Talking about great effects, we could also make some alterations to the movement of the head if we wanted to. If we, for example, just changed the values up here, and we're actually turning the head, and we'll have a look through the scanline render and then maybe into parts of our composite right here, switch back to our 2D view, and go to our transformations. And you can see the head, or the face, better to say, is now actually looking at us. Okay, this doesn't look that great at the moment, but that's because we didn't prepare for it. If we wanted to change the shot, of course, we would need to have his whole head rotate and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to show you this very simple concept of, now that we've got everything in 3D, we can make alterations quite an easy way. Also, if the actor's head was turning more, I mean, this guy here, he's more or less looking in the direction of the gun the whole time, but if he was actually quickly having a look over his shoulder, that would be a great way how we keep our little painted area in place, just by animating our head mesh or our head geometry. Okay, let me undo that since I don't want to do that now. I just wanted to show you what could be done. There. Now, as I was just turning that head, you could see it really clearly, but they're still there. We've got these really hard edges, and that's where our 3D head is joining over our actual footage, which doesn't look too great. If we take a look at our scanline render output, we are getting this alpha. Going back to the RGBA side, we can see this is actually causing the problem. This is exactly where our line is. So what we could do is we could modify the alpha. The other thing that we could do is we could use our shape that we made earlier to use that as a matte and not have any of the head at all, just the painted part. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to add a shuffle, connect that to our scanline render, and then right here I'm going to choose our shape, and if you connect the viewer to our shuffle, you can see we've got our shape in our RGBA here now, and we can just take our mask input. Let me zoom in here so you can see. If I take my mask input from my merge, I can use our RGBA image as a mask. And if I toggle that on and off, you can see here's the line, or maybe it was visible better right here. If I toggle, you can see this is definitely coming from our 3D. We've got these distortions due to the mesh, and we're removing that. Now, doing it this way has one downside. We're now losing our light animation on the rest of the head. So we could just draw a roto shape, use that for color correction, connect that shape, maybe the intensity to our curve tool that we had earlier, and so recreate the light, the brightness of the muzzle flash, which we would anyway need on the thumb and other parts, clothing, and so on and so forth, and maybe go even further and have parts of the light also affect our buildings in the background plate. Just for good looks, I'm also going to merge our background plate to our final output here. I'm going to add a merge, and we will connect that to where our background plate is coming from. This little dot right here, our background plate. We'll connect the B side, and then we're going to drag the merge all the way down here. I'm just going to add a little helper right in here, make a corner, and back to where our rifleman is coming through, connect him, and since our muzzle flash is the last thing that's supposed to go on top, we're just going to take that out right here and add that on top of our final composite, and there we go. I think that's really all that we're going to cover in this video. You can see it's coming together nicely. Of course, there would be some alterations that we would have to make. I think, for example, the horn is a little bit big at the moment. Then we've got this area at the nose, which is not so nice. The transition could be better. That could be probably fixed through color correction. And I've got my distorted area here, which would need repainting. I could also punch a hole through our painted area here to get his original eye back, or insert a red glowing one, or whatever you want to do. We could also add little glints in the eyes that also connect to the curve tool and also reflect the muzzle flash, or get brighter and darker with the muzzle flash. But this is it for now. Thank you very much for watching so far. I'm just quickly going to move through the script one more time just to explain what we've done so far.